I gotta complain with you, friends. I've been living a double life. It's like this. In my heart, I'm a tinkerer. I've built my entire career on finding ways to hang out with the smartest people in the industry and learn what they're working on. And I'm a generalist. I'm a novelty seeker. I'm a collector of domain names for unfinished side projects. But there's more to me than that. I contain multitudes. I'm also a developer with 20 years experience under my belt. I've been both a casualty and the cause of large-scale, ambitious rewrites of products and services used by millions of developers. And I've lived through all the pain and PagerDuty that comes along with that. So when I hear somebody saying that they can solve all their company's problems by tearing the whole app down and rebuilding it in whatever the new hotness is, forgive me if I settle back into the 1,000-yard stare and take a drag off of my imaginary cigarette and just let that single solitary tear roll down my cheek as I remember all the sins of my youth. It's never that simple. There are two wolves battling inside me. One fights for excitement, for the joy of building something new, of challenging myself to learn, of exploring uncharted territory. The other fights for boredom, for the joy of having nothing urgent, of doing whatever I want with my time, of total freedom from interruption. I used to think I'd have to choose a winner, but maybe if I build the right habits and instincts, I can feed them both, and then I'll just have a couple of floofy boy best friends. Now, look, I can only speak based on my own experience, but given everything that I have seen, shipped, learned from, celebrated, and suffered through, I've landed on a general rule that serves me well, at least when I choose to follow my own advice. Work projects should be built on the most boring tech possible. A boring tech stack leads to the best professional outcomes, and maybe unexpectedly, it also leads to a less boring life. Allow me to explain. Let's take a minute and establish some shared definitions, because you're welcome to disagree with me about anything that I say, but I want to make sure that we're not disagreeing about what words mean. When I say exciting, I'm referring to the tech that's making the rounds through developer circles. It is showing up on conference stages. It's being hyped by your favorite tech personality, like this doofus. By contrast, boring tech is meant to describe something that's been put through its paces. It's well established. It's in production across the industry. It's actively maintained and has a large community that's been using it for a while. So my maybe hot take is this. In a professional setting, a boring tech stack is going to outperform the exciting one in the vast majority of cases for all the business metrics that actually matter. Exciting tech is fun. It's intriguing. It drives the developer zeitgeist. It gives us something to talk about. But also, exciting tech unleashes chaos on engineering teams. It gives us so many new things that we have to learn. And in a lot of cases, that prevents us from shipping the things that would actually benefit the business. So what do I mean by chaos? Well, allow me to channel my inner 80s management consultant and introduce an acronym. CHAOS. Complex, hazardous, aspirational, opaque, and speculative. How many moving parts does this tech have? How many novel concepts does the team have to learn in order to use it? How many of the APIs are in beta or experimental? How many breaking changes have shipped in the last year or two? How much of this tech's value is proven versus aspirational? How many apps are shipping that are more substantial than a proof of concept? How easily can you find answers to usage questions? How many libraries are you going to need to write yourself if you adopt this tool? How many unanswered questions are there about what happens when this tech hits real-world usage challenges? Are there teams who have actually built it, or are these use cases all speculative? Boring gets stigmatized, but if I'm being honest, I would vastly prefer to be bored out of my head than to have my tech stack constantly surprise me. The last thing I want is for the technical foundations that I'm building on to be exciting. So here's another acronym, BORED. Balanced, obvious, reliable, established, and documented. I want to be able to make a balanced assessment of the tool and accurately weigh the trade-offs against real-world usage. I want my tech to be the obvious solution, reusing existing knowledge, extensive prior art, intuitive APIs, very few moving parts. It should be a clear win. I want my tech to be extremely reliable. It should work so dependably that we literally never have to think about it after it's deployed. I want an established tech stack with a robust ecosystem and a healthy community. And I want that community to stay healthy even after the early adopters have moved on to the next big trend. And I want my tech to be thoroughly documented. I don't want just great docs, but I want community articles. I want case studies. I want extensive discussions about the experiences and trade-offs of using the tech in the real world. Despite being a fairly novelty-driven person in general, I really never want my tech stack at work to be exciting. To me, an exciting tech stack at work smells like PagerDuty because stuff broke unexpectedly and only a few people in the company understand the new tech well enough to fix it. It smells like outages because we have too many moving parts that can fail intermittently. It smells like blowing up the roadmap to fit in unexpected maintenance because the new version dropped and has a whole bunch of backward compatibility problems. It smells like surprise requirements because we didn't know the tech was going to need that. Look, I don't want any of that. I want my work to be utterly, unflinchingly, unapologetically boring. Boring tech at work sounds far more appealing. There are very few points of potential failure. Everyone on the team can identify and fix problems because we've all seen them a million times before. And PagerDuty exists, but we can't actually remember the last time somebody got paged because things just work. All right, so let's take a pause here and reflect because it's important to consider how much context and nuance matter when you're talking about decisions like these. Because look, something that's fun in one context can be absolutely terrible in another. Like, I love swimming if I'm at a pool party with friends. I absolutely do not want to find myself swimming in an ocean in a storm after my boat capsizes. And look, some things are appropriate in certain contexts that make absolutely no sense in another context. If you want to dip strawberries or almonds in chocolate, I'm all for it. It's one of my favorite things. But if you dip a sardine in chocolate, I'm pretty sure that qualifies as domestic terrorism. So while we're talking about boring and exciting tech, I want to make sure that I'm being very clear that I'm not saying that there is a right or a wrong decision here. There are just trade-offs. Because remember, there's rarely a good or a bad tool. There's just tools and jobs, and there are tools that are more appropriate for some jobs than others. Now, there are a few places where I do want excitement at work, so I want to be clear about that. But none of them involve my tech stack. I want the team to be excited when we ship that new feature and it worked without issues. I want leadership to be excited when they see how quickly our team delivers. I want product to be excited when they see all the positive customer feedback about how our app is rock solid and does exactly what they expect it to do. And I want our customers to be excited that they don't have to worry about the problem our product solves anymore because what we built just works. This kind of excitement is what makes work rewarding, avoids burnout, leads to raises in promotion, and gains trust across the company, so we have more influence over what and how we build things. And in my experience, all of that is far easier to achieve if the tech stack itself is boring. And look, I know that some of you might be looking at me right now with some pretty strong objections. You stand upon this stage and demand that I deny my very nature. I am elite 10x hacker, yet you tell me to lock myself in a boring box? Do you tell fish not to swim? You would clip the wings of a genius. For some developers, myself included, we are lucky enough that writing code is not only our living, it's also one of our hobbies. My hobby projects embrace chaos. Excitement is the name of the game. I try everything. I make a huge mess. I over-engineer the heck out of everything. I ship pre-alpha software. This is how I learn. It's how I play. It's so much fun. I love it. It brings me immense joy. But here's the thing. No one is depending on my hobby projects. No one gets paged if they break. No one has to write into support if they're flaky. I don't have teammates or customers. I'm just playing around with code. And if we treat the code that we write for our jobs the way that we treat our hobby projects, real people get exposed to real risk. Our coworkers who depend on this software for their livelihoods, our customers, all of these people suffer if things go wrong because we wanted to play with new tech. The stakes are just much higher at work, and the consequences are far more painful and expensive. And we have to be careful about how much excitement we actually want to introduce, and to be sure that the excitement we're introducing is actually solving a real problem. If we're prioritizing our hobbyist tendencies over the interests and needs of our customers and coworkers, we're no longer doing good work. In fact, we're actively becoming a detriment to our team and to our company. And look, I learned this lesson by getting this wrong many, many times. I'm not claiming the moral high ground here. I'm just hoping that by showing you my scars, maybe you'll be able to avoid getting a few extras of your own. I've been writing software for about 20 years now, and I've been an early adopter many times in that lifespan. And I've only ever not regretted it once when I've introduced brand new tech at work. In every other instance, the downsides ended up far outweighing the technical wins. So my pros are that I got to build a new thing and that was fun, and it solved some small technical challenge. The cons are we had to retrain everyone on the team on the new tech, which was slow and frustrating for everyone and extremely expensive for the company. It also reintroduced a host of edge cases that we'd already solved in the old stack. We had to build libraries because they hadn't been created in this particular ecosystem yet. And we had to spend a lot of time fixing and tweaking the tech stack itself instead of building new features. Now, any one of those things can be something that you can do strategically, but you have to go into it eyes open. You don't want to accidentally become the maintainers of the ecosystem because you become critically dependent on an ecosystem that nobody else wants to maintain. So as a real world example, let me tell you the story of the time I broke learnwithjason.dev. So learnwithjason had been running on a static site generator for years with no issues. It had just kind of existed and continued to function. And I had been building a backlog of features that I wanted to try, and at the same time getting excited about a server rendered framework that I wanted to try out. So I thought to myself, hey, what a great idea. I'm going to rebuild the whole site in this server rendered framework, and I'll get to build these new features and I'll get to try out this new thing that sounds like fun. And all of a sudden, things got really exciting. I found myself getting DMs because my site was down. People sent me screenshots of 500 errors. I suddenly had intermittent outages that I couldn't reproduce because they only happened at certain times a day or certain times of the month. And all of this led to me actually grinding to a halt on all these features that I thought I was going to ship. Instead, I was spending all of my free time trying to fix problems with this tech stack that I had introduced because I was excited about it. And on top of that, I suddenly had to think about my infrastructure. I was getting emails from my server because I would have the site crash and it needed to restart, and there was out of memory errors, and there were things that I didn't really know what they meant, but I was getting emails about them and I wasn't sure if I needed to care. Was it just informational or was it action required? I wasn't sure, and I didn't really have the time to dig in and do the research on what any of these things meant or what I was supposed to do about them. I ultimately made the decision to go back to a pre-rendered framework, and now my tech stack is as boring as it gets. I basically just ship static files to a CDN. And ever since then, I haven't had an outage. I haven't had an intermittent failure, a 500 report, any of that. It's just boring. It just works. I had near identical issues with a different server rendered framework, and I've made a lot of consulting money helping other teams untangle their server rendered framework blues. So it's not an isolated problem. Like, is it possible that this was user error? Like, yeah, absolutely. I could have been doing a lot of things wrong, but the fact that I was able to make those kinds of mistakes that took down production and had all these challenges for me is maybe a sign that I had added too many moving parts to my tech stack. Instead of just letting me do the thing that I wanted to do, which is run my business, I was spending too much time running my tech stack. Ultimately, I want to spend my energy building things, not maintaining things. Every minute that I spend wrestling my tech stack to get it to do the one thing that it's supposed to do, which is deliver a website to users, that's a minute I'm not spending building something valuable to my business or my customers. So it's important. I want to clarify that I'm not saying never adopt new technology. I'm asking everyone to just do a thorough risk assessment before introducing new software. It's important that we make sure new technology actually solves problems before we take on that tech debt. And remember, the trade-offs of adopting new tech reach far beyond the tech itself. For example, who needs retraining to get the most out of this tech? What infrastructure changes are required? Who manages that? Who gets paged when this goes down? Who maintains the libraries that you're going to depend on after you switch? How much of the community is the early adopter crowd because you really don't want to get stuck with the responsibility of maintaining the entire ecosystem? What will you have to build that's not actually a feature for your customers if you take on this tech debt? When you factor in all the rebuilding, covering of edge cases, implementing all the special handling, and the other bespoke work that'll get you back just to the baseline of where your current tech stack is, are you actually going to be saving any time, or will you just end up in the same place you're in today, only months later down the road, and you haven't been able to actually ship valuable things that your customers care about? But let's be clear here, waiting too long to adopt new tech, that can also lead to excitement, because every file in your code base being append only because no one understands how it works, that's not boring. If the tech stack you use is no longer actively maintained and you don't get any major security or other feature updates, that's not boring. If your team is forced to do all the upstream maintenance because the community's gone, it's no longer boring. If the tech stack is actively preventing you from shipping things, that's not boring. The goal is to find the right blend of tech that allows you to actually build the things that your customers want and care about most, if not all, of the time. I want my tech stack to be boring so I can choose my excitement and have enough free time to enjoy it. I want to spend my energy building new projects, not fixing old ones. I want to spend my time creating software people want, not wrestling with tech details they won't notice. And most importantly, I want to spend my weekends cooking over fires, not putting out fires. And I want the same thing for you, friends. So please, let's make our tech choices at work boring together and leave ourselves plenty of time for excitement on our own terms. Thank you.
Hi, friends.
That was an amazing talk.
Awesome.
Thank you. I tweeted about this yesterday. This talk made me very nervous because it was really far out of my comfort zone. Because I was like, okay, I'm going to do this with no slides. I'm going to do this, direct to camera. Like, let's see if we can make this work. And I was panicking. I almost canceled yesterday. I was like, I can't send this in. I just got to throw it away. Like, it's not good. So I'm very glad that everybody liked it. Thank you very much for all the kind words, y'all.
Yeah, it was very, very well received. Lots of great feedback in the chat. So we appreciate being challenged with these ideas and different ways of doing things. At least, I know that I really appreciated being able to see that. And also the production quality was very, very excellent.
So Jason, I thought this, and someone actually put it in the Q&A. What was the one piece of tech that you did not regret? Because as soon as you said, I'm like, ooh, I wonder what it is. But you never said what it was.
I shipped GraphQL at IBM.
Nice.
And it was the right choice because we had a few dozen independent microservices and we didn't have good communication channels. So GraphQL provided a centralized layer for having those services speak to each other. And it very drastically simplified the communication between teams. But yeah, that was one of those ones where it was a very clear pain point with no real solution, and GraphQL proposed a solution that didn't exist before. So that was the thing.
There's another question here. Someone wants to know, when do you decide that performance requires that you switch stacks?
I mean, this is one of those classic it depends moments where the right moment is when it takes you more effort and more lost time to keep the existing thing running. Because at any point that you make the decision to switch to a new stack, you're about to take on a huge amount of slowdown, new work, building things that aren't really related to your product roadmap. So if you do that, you need to be getting something that actually puts you above that baseline, because if you're going along like this and then you do a rebuild, your productivity drops down here. So when you come back and have done all that work, if you're still at that same baseline, it's not worth doing. So there's a point where the tech gets old enough, outdated enough, hard enough to work with, that it starts your productivity is going down, at which point the trade-off is worth it because it puts you back above baseline once you've done that migration.
Love it. Great answer.
I think that it can be hard to find that balance, right? Between jumping on the new thing too early or too late, right? So how do you, I think that's a skill that has to be developed. So how do you develop that skill?
I mean, if we're going off of the way that I did it, you'd get it terribly wrong for 20 years, and eventually that resolves into a set of instincts. But I think that more realistically, it's learning to ask questions beyond like, is this fun? Is this new? Is this exciting? And starting to think strategically, like if we adopt this tech, strategically, what value does it offer over things that we're already doing? And you should default to no on new tech, because then what you're doing is instead of saying, I'm really excited about this, I want to ship it, why wouldn't I? You're shifting your thinking to, there's no reason to rebuild the stack. So why would we take this risk? And if you can make enough of a case that you clear that, like, oh, well, this does provide enough upside to be worth the risk, then it turns into you're making the right trade-offs at that point, you know. And I think it does well to become a bit of a cynic when it comes to new tech, not in the sense that you should think all new tech is bad, but that in the sense of using a healthy dose of skepticism when you start adopting new tech, and really weighing all those questions that I went through in the keynote of, you know, you're about to introduce a lot of churn and a lot of pain and a lot of stress. Are you sure that you're actually getting enough value to exceed that risk?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that's a really great way to approach it. And I like the idea of having a framework for it, right? There's a lot of process to think through, and it can be really challenging to work towards that thing. So having any kind of insight into how to do that is going to help to improve the experience for everybody.
Thank you. I really appreciate everybody coming and turning out today. This was an absolute blast. And yeah, let's all be bored so that we can hang out and do fun stuff together instead of fixing our production problems.
Absolutely. I love it.
Great way to end.
All right. Well, thanks.
Jason.
Thanks so much, Jason.